Jackson Center. I'm thrilled that you all could join us, especially I'm glad we started at 9 a.m. and not noon, as this thing's going to get hotter and hotter in this room. We should probably also start the air conditioning fund here today. As you might guess, this Robert H. Jackson Center is a work in progress. We are certainly nowhere near a finished product, but it's something which has occurred very rapidly through the assistance of a whole lot of people, which I'll recognize in a few minutes. My name is Greg Peterson. I'm the president of the Robert H. Jackson Center. This is just a very special occasion where we'll be dedicating a portrait of Robert Jackson to be presented by Lurabel Colburn, who I will recognize in a few minutes. Also, it's extra special because our audience includes various members of the Robert H. Jackson family. And we're thrilled that they've made an extra effort to come here today. Let me just briefly introduce them for the audience. We have the granddaughter of Robert Jackson, Julia Craighill. Julia. And with Julia is the great-granddaughter of Robert Jackson, Julie. Julie here. And the great-grandson, Bo. So we also have Robert Jackson's grandson, Tom Loftus. Tom, here. With his wife, Phyllis. And his Robert Jackson's two great-granddaughters, they would be Vanessa and Melanie. Thank you very much. We all know him and we love him, and he's been an integral part of our Robert Jackson Center movement from day one. His nephew, Harold Adams. Harold, thank you. And though not directly in the genealogical line of Robert Jackson, he seems as if he is. So we're thrilled to have Professor Barrett, John Q. Barrett from St. John's Law School, who's here with his wife, Sarah, and his daughter, Katja, and if they would be recognized. A variety of dignitaries, and if I start going down the list, inevitably I'll miss somebody and embarrass myself. However, I do need to recognize Judge Tarasi, Supreme Court Justice. The program today, very quickly, I'll just have a quick overview. Hopefully you received, when you walked in, a package which included words from his mighty pen, which is a pamphlet that's been graded by the staff of the Post-Journal, which will give you an overview of Robert Jackson. It will give you some of his statements and some articles that have been written, very thoroughly written and researched by Stephen Hope. Steve's over here from the Post-Journal, and Steve, thank you for all of your good work here. He's covered us almost from day one and has made it a passion, and we really appreciate that. I'm going to afterwards give a quick biographical overview. There will be a video of Robert Jackson at Nuremberg. Then we're going to have a special unveiling by Lurabel Colburn. We'll be assisted by her sidekick, Harold Adams. Professor Barrett will be giving us some words regarding Robert Jackson and reflections on the portrait that will be unveiled. And hopefully you'll all join us for a reception to thank Lurabel for her terrific, kind gift for the Robert Jackson Center, which will serve us well for many, many years to come. So with that, we're here to celebrate an extraordinary life, which has been sort of manifested today by the Robert H. Jackson Center. As you know, the mission has been made possible through the trustees whose efforts have, many of you are aware. Some of them are here today. We have Judge Cass, we have Jeanette Carlson, Harold Adams, Betty Lene, who's unable to be with us today, Riley Kidder, who is our executive director and has done a fantastic job. We also, our board consists of Bruce Janowski, Randy Sweeney, who's right over here, as I mentioned, Harold Adams. We are thrilled, absolutely thrilled, to have the opportunity to have a place like the Robert Jackson Center. And much of that could not have been possible without certain benefactors. And I can't help but stop and pause and reflect on, we wouldn't be here today without Carl Kappa, Carl's vision and willingness to participate and to support that vision is why we are here today. And that, coupled with Betty Lene's joint vision, they're the ones that put the financial backbone behind this operation. Fortuitously, at the same time that that was occurring, we were blessed to have the vision of Dan Bratton. And Dan, whether it's our mission statement, whether it's what it is that we have been trying to do programmatically, he's everywhere in this theater and in this building. Juanita Bratton is here today, and Juanita, as we always do, but I want to underscore it constantly that you're permitting Dan to play with us for the period of time that the good Lord provided him. We'll never forget. So thank you very much, Juanita. Our mission is to preserve the memory of Justice Jackson. The Center's mission is to preserve it and the values of Justice Jackson by our hope of exhibiting artifacts, some of which we have here today. You will note, if you do walk in, there's an easel. There's an easel down there which has two commissions. One commission is signed by Franklin Roosevelt, which commissioned Robert Jackson to be Justice of the Supreme Court. Another commission is the one signed by Harry Truman, which commissioned him to be what is the Chief Prosecutor at Nuremberg. A fancy title, John can tell us to us later, but that's in essence what it was. And ironically, for those who have been studying the Nuremberg trials, it's co-signed by Francis Biddle. Did you know that? So we hope to have expanded exhibitry, the Library of Congress, through the good graces of Dan Bratton working with Justice O'Connor. I think that's going to become a reality in the not too distant future. We're going to be assembling these artifacts, and those will be displayed here for the benefit of kind of a national as well as a local crowd. Our goal is to also be sponsoring programs, and we've had many to date. I won't enumerate them other than to underscore one which we had last October, which virtually all the surviving Nuremberg prosecutors came back to reflect on the boss, Robert Jackson. That was a remarkable time. I can tell you we're going to replicate something similar to that this October, as all of the clerks of Justice Jackson, save one, and I can't talk about it publicly since the press is here, will be here in October, and that'll be another extraordinary event. We are putting together programs which encourage scholarship, and we'll be hosting a variety of speakers in connection with his life and his career. We've got a website. John Light is here with his wife Annette, who've been intricately involved in the graphics and making sure that website is up and moving. We're a work in progress, as is this center. So if you type in www.roberthjackson.org, boom, you'll see some stuff that, and you can thank John Light and Annette for making that happen today. As I mentioned, we're here to preserve the memory of Robert Jackson. And part of that legacy finds form in many ways, certainly programmatically, but there's a special way that it's going to find form today from a very much a pictorial viewpoint, and a portrait that I've seen and Harold's seen and a couple of us have seen, and it's quite extraordinary. We are blessed to have Lurabel here. We are blessed to have Lurabel's son David and his wife Joanne and family. David's back there. And also part of the family came in from Japan, and I'm thrilled. Thank you very much for coming. And we also have Lurabel's daughter, Martha, and the niece is here. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you making special effort. A little bit about Lurabel Colburn. This is from her little biography, and she is very shy about this, but let me read it. Her early art training consisted of public school courses in Lockwood, Ohio, followed by 4 years in the Cleveland School of Art. As she mentioned, those were Depression years, and so we will not ask her age. And I was grateful for scholarships during this period. I also received much encouragement from my grade school teachers. My 5th grade teacher took me to her evening adult education classes at the public library, where I learned some basic approaches to drawing faces. The art school offered courses on all fields of art. I chose to major in portrait during my last 2 years. I was given the opportunity to teach part-time in the school's summer and night school classes, and this helped me during my days of adult education art classes in Bemis Point. In her senior year, she was asked to draw quick sketches of guests at the opening of the Terrace Room Lounge and Bar at the Hotel Stanley, where, for some of us would remember, Swing and Sway Sammy Kaye entertained the dancers. I won't ask for hands. This was an education in and of itself. As she says, I was offered a chance to go on a circuit of DeWitt-operated hotels through the country, which was not necessarily a goal of mine. At graduation time, I was offered a year's study abroad, which I appreciated but declined because of my choice to marry her sweetheart of 6 years, Walter Colburn. And she just simply says, concludes, since graduation, I've continued to make portraits. I would say so. Most everybody's hand would raise, knowing that someplace in their family room is a portrait done by Lurabel Colburn. At this point, I'd like to ask Harold Adams and Lurabel to come forward for this unveiling. And I also, while they do that, tell you that as kind of how this happened, a good friend Chuck called one day, told me and said, Greg, do you know about Lurabel Colburn? I said, absolutely, premier portraiturist, if there's such a term, in the area, and mentioned the fact that Lurabel would be interested in doing something for the Robert Jackson Center. Well, I'm not shy about following that up. I called that afternoon. The next day she was here. We looked at the exhibitry, and Lurabel was very quick to get involved, and I couldn't have been happier because she tried to convince me of her talents, and she didn't have to do that. Their courtroom is replete with Lurabel Colburn portraits of judges, and rooms all over the county are complete with portraits. And as she proceeded, and this is about an 8-month project. I mean, we're talking major league research to defend Historical Society, grabbing photos from here. This is really well documented and exceedingly, as you'll see, well done. But she called and says, Greg, you need to see it. And I said, no, I really want to be surprised just like everybody else. And she'd say, no, you really need to see it. Well, I've known that Harold Adams, the nephew, and one of the few folks in our audience today who had a close and intimate relationship with Justice Jackson, was there frequently to add guidance and criticism. And then he left a voicemail one day, and I knew we'd arrived. Said he'd been out to Lurabel Colburn's, and quote, painting is finished, and it is, in my opinion, one of the best Jackson portraits ever made, anytime, anywhere, end of quote, Harold Adams. So with that backdrop, I'm pleased to introduce Lurabel Colburn, and we can unveil the portrait at this time. Give her the opportunity if she chooses. Do you want to say a word about the portrait?
It was a pleasure to do. And I appreciate your encouragement. Mr. Adams was my guide, and that's his time. It was a very pleasant experience, and I'm thankful to have had the opportunity. I appreciate your being here, and I appreciate my family being here. And I have many more.
If I may, I'd like to say Lurabel put not only her talent, but her heart into this project. And on behalf of the center and family, we're really grateful.
Thank you.
On behalf of the Robert Jackson Center, let me gratefully receive this for the Robert Jackson Center, and it will be presented very appropriately. Thank you very much, Lurabel Colburn. Now I'm pleased to introduce Professor John Q. Barrett, Professor of Law at St. John's University. He's also the recipient of the first Elizabeth S. Lene Fellowship from the Robert H. Jackson Center. You're in for a treat. John has you've had an opportunity to have John speak at a couple of opportunities here at the Robert Jackson Center. He never ceases to wow. How's that for an intro, John? For those folks who don't know his background quickly, graduate of Georgetown University, Harvard Law School. As I mentioned, Professor of Law at St. John's University. Currently editing the Justice Robert H. Jackson's Memoirs of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and writing a biographical account of Jackson's year, Chief American Prosecutor at the Nuremberg trial, and I think that's been expanded. John was a prosecutor in the office of the Independent Counsel of Lawrence Walsh during the Iran-Contra investigation. And Juanita, I don't know if Ed Meese and John want to have lunch together sometime when he's at Chautauqua. That would be kind of fun. He does come to Chautauqua. He was counselor to Inspector General Michael Bromwich in the United States Department of Justice, served as law clerk to Judge Leon Higginbottom of the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit in Philadelphia. He's published numerous law review articles, including one on the landmark Warren Court decision approving police stop and frisk practice. You will see him frequently in the print media and has appeared on C-SPAN, National Public Radio, NBC Nightly News, the News Hour with Jim Lehrer, Nightlight, and I always like to end with this, and he appeared at Chautauqua Institution in the Hall of Philosophy last year to a packed crowd with that noted lawyer, Greg Peterson. So with that, I'm thrilled to introduce Professor Barrett. John?
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be part of this special occasion and to contribute a few words about Robert H. Jackson, about tribute and dedication events, and about the magnetic power of great people in their depictions. As a prominent public figure, obviously, for most of his life, Robert Jackson attended and participated in more than his fair share of tributes and dedications. On these many occasions, Jackson often wrote and spoke, and of course his prose was always beautiful, about a living monument. Two examples I can point to are a 1932 talk that he gave to fellow Jamestown High School alumni here at the Hotel Jamestown, where he paid tribute to their former teacher and principal, Milton J. Fletcher, who was in attendance. In early 1940, when Robert Jackson was the new Attorney General, he gave a speech about the proper role and conduct of government lawyers and paid tribute to the former Attorney General, then Justice Harlan Fiske Stone, who was in attendance. And that talk was nationally broadcast by radio and is quite a sterling piece of oratory. On many other occasions, Jackson paid tribute to remembered monuments from his life and his experiences. In 1931, he spoke here in Jamestown at the Euclid School to Jamestown residents about his beloved and then recently deceased former teacher, Mary Willard. In 1940, Jackson spoke to the Supreme Court bar of the then recently deceased Justice Pierce Butler. Butler had been a member of the anti-New Deal Nine Old Men Court, and Jackson described him candidly, a very Jacksonian speech, as utterly wrong in matters of legal and constitutional analysis. This is speaking about the recently deceased, but utterly principled and decent in how he conducted himself on the bench and in his judging. On April 13, 1945, a Friday the 13th, that's pretty high on the list of bad ones, I think, certainly in Jackson's life, he spoke tearfully in the Great Hall at the Department of Justice about Franklin D. Roosevelt, the president, of course, for his life and for the lives of everyone in that time, who had died so suddenly the previous afternoon in Warm Springs. And a year later, when Jackson was serving as the chief American prosecutor at Nuremberg, he made a trip to Czechoslovakia, and he spoke at that country's Roosevelt commemoration ceremony extemporaneously and very movingly a year after Roosevelt's death. Jackson also participated in dedicating numerous buildings and their accessories. Of course, this building is one. In its former incarnation as the consistory of the New York Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. Jackson, a Mason, regularly attended events here and participated and spoke in tributes and dedications of various types. Just down the block at the Elks Club, which Jackson presided over in 1927, I think the exact title is Supreme Exalted Ruler of the Elks, he dedicated a tablet there to the Civil War veteran and New York State Militia Colonel Augustus F. Allen, whose home the building was originally. A more distant example is the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Attorney General Jackson attended the dedication of that building in 1941, and on that occasion he heard President Roosevelt and others praise the generosity of the donors and benefactors who had made that great monument and its contents possible. Of course, prior to the event, FDR had joked privately that he wanted Jackson himself to do the dedicatory honors. You see, Jackson some years earlier was the person who prosecuted Andrew W. Mellon for civil tax evasion. And it was during that trial that Mr. Mellon's lawyer spontaneously announced that Mr. Mellon had decided to donate a vast portion of his personal art collection to the grateful nation. Jackson and everyone at the time knew that without the tax case, there would be no National Gallery of Art. A final example can be found in Chicago, near the very end of his life. In November 1953, Justice Jackson laid the cornerstone there of what would become the first American Bar Center at the University of Chicago. And on that occasion, he delivered a true valedictory address regarding his faith in the rule of law, the power of reason, and the profession of lawyering. When the center was dedicated a year later, August 1954, Jackson again was present, and he got to see that the concluding words from his 1953 address had been carved in Indiana blue limestone over the building's entrance. It's still there, and it reads, "A cathedral to testify to our faith in the rule of law." Each of these events and dedications, and the many more in Jackson's life that resembled them, were characterized by the testament of his presence, the genuineness of his emotion, the beauty of his expression, and of course the power of his ideas and his values. This morning's portrait dedication, and the painting itself that we have gathered here to admire, similarly delivers Jackson himself, and all that he was and all that he stood for, by capturing so well his look, his bearing, his wonderfully expressive face, and I must say, now that I'm standing next to it, his eyes. Ms. Colburn's painting is not, of course, the first Jackson portrait to go on public display. Indeed, the visage of Robert H. Jackson can be found in many notable locations. In Washington, D.C., at the headquarters of the IRS, it's one of the photographs that hangs in the third-floor hallway outside the General Counsel's office. At the Department of Justice, where he was Assistant Attorney General first in the Tax Division, his photograph hangs in that incumbent's conference room. Similarly, in the Antitrust Division, where he was next Assistant Attorney General, his photograph hangs in that incumbent's conference room. In the Office of the Solicitor General, Jackson's photograph is one of the select few, this is now a portrait that currently hangs in the front office of the incumbent Solicitor General. The official portrait of Robert Jackson as Attorney General was painted in 1941 by John Christian Johansson, who was one of America's noted portrait painters. It hangs today by the special selection of the Deputy Attorney General in his conference room. As an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, of course, Jackson was photographed with his colleagues, and he was also painted in a portrait, as each justice is. His official court portrait, also painted by Mr. Johansson, who in effect updated the Attorney General portrait when Jackson died suddenly, unexpectedly in 1954, was completed in 1956. And that painting today hangs in the Supreme Court building, in the office there that is dedicated to the use of the Solicitor General, with the paintings of the select number of other former Solicitors General who then went on to become Justices of the Supreme Court. Justice Jackson's painting and portrait also resides outside the court. The National Portrait Gallery, not the National Gallery of Art, but close, which is part of the Smithsonian, has in its permanent collection a 1950 drawing by Felix Topolsky of Jackson. That is a wonderful character study. The Portrait Gallery also has in its study collection an Oscar Stessel drawing of Jackson in his judicial robes. The Des Moines, Iowa Art Center has in its collection and in its current public display a 1963 painting by Ben Shahn, the famous American social realist painter. This work, which is entitled Integration, Supreme Court, depicts Jackson and his 8 Supreme Court colleagues all white men, which is of course part of the point, sitting at their seats on the bench before the pillars that tower behind them. They were, of course, the court that stepped up and bravely and boldly decided unanimously Brown versus Board of Education, validating public school segregation in May of 1954. And here in Chautauqua County, the courthouse at Mayville includes, above the judge's bench in the county courtroom, its own copy, donated by the Jamestown Bar Association in the late 1950s, of Johansson's Supreme Court portrait of Justice Jackson. Unlike all previous portraits and photographs, however, Ms. Colburn's work now resides here in Jamestown. This location is significant historically because Jamestown became Jackson's home when he was 18 years old, and it served as his touchstone for the rest of his life. The Jamestown location is also significant looking forward because the Robert H. Jackson Center for Justice is becoming, and for the future will be, the touchstone for learning about Jackson's life, his accomplishments, his values, and his ideas. I'd like to close by recalling a few words from someone who we remember and bless this weekend, Jackson's late son-in-law, G. Bowden Craighill, Jr. Bodie Craighill came into the Jackson family only during the Justice's last few years. A favorite Bob Jackson quip about Bodie, who was an accomplished Washington, D.C. lawyer then and throughout his long life, was that he, Bob Jackson, was delighted to have a son-in-law in law. I think of Bodie Craighill on this occasion because he once gave me this lovely description of the power of Robert Jackson's personality. This is a quote. "If you walked into a room filled with 50 people, including Justice Jackson," Bodie said, "you would say, even before you knew who was there, that there was a magnet in the room because of the way that people were drawn to him." On this occasion, I think we can all now say that the Jackson Center has, in Ms. Colburn's wonderful portrait, an accurate, beautiful, and very much alive Robert H. Jackson that is this center's own magnet. Her portrait of this great man will draw near and move the many people who will view it here, and by viewing it, truly see and experience his presence as they learn about him and from him. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Please, this concludes the formal activities of today, and we ask you if you could stay around for a few minutes and join us in celebrating this wonderful contribution of Lurabel Colburn to the Robert H. Jackson Center. However, we will be taking a little bit of Lurabel's time immediately thereafter to do some photo ops with the family, so don't slip away too quickly. And I know you're under time constraints, you're a memorial service, and we have another memorial service, so we'll try to move this along. But for the family's sake, if we could kind of gather around here, we'll get some pictures. Thank you very much for coming to this very special event. By the way, as you are departing, there is a commemorative card of today's activities. We did not hand these out in advance for obvious reasons, but it's a wonderful keepsake of what happened here today. Thank you.
That's what happens, you know. All right, everybody looking here? Good. That looks good.